there are parameters within which conscience has to operate, and that it's sort of like this. It's like it's the same parameters that govern fair play, we'll say that. And so you can say there's fair play within a game, and there's fair play across sets of games, and the set of games is pretty much indistinguishable from the actual environment, right? If you think about all the things you do as nested games, at some point the spread of that is large enough so it encompasses everything you do, which includes the environment. And so I believe that you're adapted to the set of all possible games, roughly speaking, all possible playable games, something like that, and that you know the rules for that, which is why we talked about this a little bit, why you're so good at identifying cheaters. You have a module for that according to the evolutionary psychologists, and you not only do you identify them, but you really remember them. It really sticks in your mind. And there's other evidence too. So one piece of evidence that I love, I think it's so, well, there's a couple. One I would derive from Franz de Waal, who's a famous primatologist, and he studied the prototype morality that emerges in chimpanzees. And it's very much nested in their dominance structures, you know, because you could think of morality in some sense as the understanding of the rules by which the dominance hierarchy operates, right? And so you could say, well, the biggest, ugliest, meanest chimp, and the male dominance hierarchies in chimps seem to be the predominant ones, although the females also have a dominance hierarchy in it. It's not quite so clear in bonobos, which seem to be more female dominated. But in any case, the primary chimp dominant structure is male, and you could think, well, it's like the caveman chimp who's biggest and toughest, who necessarily rules and who rules longest. But that isn't what de Waal found. See, the problem with being mean, let's say, and not negotiating your social landscape and not trading reciprocal favors is that no matter how powerful you are as an individual, two individuals, 3/4 of your power can do you in. And that happens with the chimps fairly regularly. If the guy on top is too tyrannical and doesn't make social connections, then weaker chimps, males, make good social connections, and when he's not in such good shape, they take him down, and viciously too. De Waal has documented some unbelievably horrendous acts of, let's call it regicide, among the chimpanzee troops that he studied, mostly in the Arnhem Zoo. They have a big troop there that's been there a long time. But he's very interested in prototypical morality. And here's some other examples of prototypical morality emerging among animals. There's many of them. But one is, you know, if two wolves have a dominance dispute, that would be more likely among the male wolves, but it doesn't really matter. They basically display their size, and they growl ferociously and puff up their hair so they look bigger. And you know, you can see cats do that when they go into fight or flight, right? Not only do they puff up, including their tail, but they stand sideways, and the reason they do that is because they look bigger, right? Because they're trying to put out the most intimidating possible front. So anyways, if two wolves are going at it, what they're really trying to do is to size each other up, and they're trying to scare each other into backing off, fundamentally. Because, see, the worst case scenario is like, you're wolf number 1 and I'm wolf number 2, and we tear each other to shreds, but I win, but I'm so damaged after that wolf number 3 comes in and takes me out. So, like, there's a big cost to be paid even for victory in a dominance dispute if it degenerates into violence. And animals and human beings, but animals in particular, have evolved very, very specific mechanisms to escalate dominance disputes towards violence step by step, so that the victor doesn't risk incapacitating himself by winning. So what happens with the wolves is that, you know, they growl at each other in posture and display, and maybe they even snap at each other, but the probability that they're going to get into a full-fledged fight is pretty low. And what happens is one of the wolves backs off and flips over and shows his neck, and that basically means, all right, tear it out, you know. And the other wolf says, of course he doesn't, well, you're kind of an idiot and you're not that strong, but we might need you to take down a moose in the future, and so, you know, despite your patheticness, I won't tear out your throat. And then they've established their dominance position, and then from then on, at least for some substantial period of time, the subordinate wolf gives way to the dominant wolf. But at least the subordinate wolf is alive, and, you know, he might be dominant over other wolves. And so everyone in the whole hierarchy has sorted that out either through mock combat or through combat itself. And, you know, the low-ranking members aren't in the best possible position, but at least they're not getting their heads torn off every second of their existence. And so there's even some utility in the stability of the dominance hierarchy for the low-ranking members, because at least they're not getting pounded, they're getting threatened, which is way better. I mean, it's not good, but it's way better than actual combat. And then there's the example of rats, which I love. This is Jaak Panksepp's work, and he wrote a book called Affective Neuroscience, which I would highly, highly recommend. I have a list of readings, recommended readings on my website. It's a brilliant book, and he's a brilliant psychologist, really. One of the top psychologists as far as I'm concerned, both theoretically and experimentally. A real genius. He's the guy who discovered that rats laugh when you tickle them. They laugh ultrasonically, so you can't actually hear them, but if you record it and slow it down, then you can hear them giggling away when you tickle them with an eraser, which is sort of like their mother's tongue. It's often what lab people use as a substitute for the licking of the little rat by the mother. And he discovered the play circuit in mammals, which is like a major deal, right? He should get a Nobel Prize for that. That's a big deal, to discover an entire motivational circuit whose existence no one had really predicted, apart from the fact that obviously mammals play. And even lizards, maybe. Some of the more social lizards seem to play, So anyhow, what Panksepp observed, and I think this is a brilliant piece of science, is that, first of all, juvenile male rats in particular like to rough and tumble play. They like to wrestle. And they actually pin each other just like little kids do, or like adult wrestlers do. They pin their shoulders down, and that basically means you win. And so, okay, so that's pretty cool. But what's even cooler, I think, well, there's three things. One is the rats will work for an opportunity to get into an arena where they know that play might occur. And so that's one of the scientific ways of testing an animal's motivation, right? So imagine you have a starving rat and it knows that it's got food down the end of a corridor. You can put a little spring on its tail and measure how hard it pulls, and that gives you an indication of its motivational force. Now, imagine the starving rat that's trying to get to some food, and you have a little spring on his tail, and you waft in some cat odor. So now that rat is starving and wants to get out of there. He's going to try to pull even farther towards the food. So getting away plus getting forward are separate motivational systems, and if you can add them together, it's real potent. And part of the reason why in the future authoring exercise that you guys are going to do as the class progresses, you're asked to outline the place you'd like to end up, which is your desired future, and also the place that you could end up if you let everything fall apart, is so that your anxiety chases you and your approach systems pull you forward. You're maximally motivated then. And it's important because otherwise you can be afraid of pursuing the things that you want to pursue, right? And that's very common. And so then the fear inhibits you as the promise pulls you forward, but it makes you weak because you're afraid. You want to get your fear behind you, pushing you. And so what you want to be is more afraid of not pursuing your goals than you are of pursuing them. It's very, very helpful. And lots of times in life, and this is something really worth knowing, and this is one of the advantages to being an autonomous adult, is you don't get to pick the best thing. You get to pick your poison. You have two bad choices, and you get to pick which one you're willing to suffer through. And every choice has a bit of that element in it. And so if you know that, it's really freeing, because otherwise you torture yourself by thinking, well, maybe there's a good solution to this, compared to the bad solution. It's like, no, sometimes there's just risky solution 1 and risky solution 2. And sometimes both of them are really bad, but you at least get to pick which one you're willing to suffer through. And that actually makes quite a bit of difference, because you're also facing it voluntarily then, instead of it chasing you. And that is an entirely different psychophysiological response. Challenge versus threat, it's not the same, even if the magnitude of the problem is the same. And so putting yourself in a challenging, let's call it mind frame, you can't just do that by magic. Putting yourself in a challenging mind frame is much easier on you psychophysiologically, because you don't go into the generalized stress response to the same degree. And you're activating your exploratory and seeking systems, which are dopaminergically mediated and that involve positive emotion. So if you can face something voluntarily rather than having it chase you, it's way better for you psychophysiologically. So that's partly why, well, it's worthwhile to go find the dragon in its lair instead of waiting for it to come and eat you. So, and especially when you also add the idea that if you go find the dragon in its lair, you might find it when it's a baby instead of a full-fledged bloody monster that is definitely going to take you down. And so that's part of the reason why, well, there's a whole bunch of things that emerge out of that observation, like Don't avoid small problems that you know are there. Face them, because they'll grow into big problems all by themselves. And you can think about, imagine the tax department sends you a notification. You owe them like $300. Well, you know, that's annoying. Maybe you don't even want to open the letter. Or maybe if you do, you just put it on the shelf. But that damn thing doesn't just sit there like a piece of paper on the shelf, right? You ignore that for 5 or 6 years, it's going to become attached to all sorts of horrible things. And if you ignore it long enough, you get the idea. It's going to turn into something that is completely unlike the little piece of paper that it's written on. And many, many problems in life are like that. You'll see that they pop their ugly little head up, and you know, and you might want to turn away. You might not want to think about it, which is the easiest way of turning away, right? You just don't attend to it. It's not like you repress it or anything like that. You just fail to attend to it. And that's really, as a long-term strategy, it's dismal. It's also something I think that's more characteristic of people who are high in neuroticism and high in agreeableness, because agreeable people don't like conflict. And people who are high in neuroticism, who are high in negative emotion, are hit harder per unit of uncertainty or threat. And so, you know, and that's partly why in psychotherapy, a lot of times the people you see need assertiveness training, so that would be the opposite of agreeableness, or they need to help get their anxiety and emotional pain under control. Those are not the only reasons. There's antisocial behavior, but you can't fix that in therapy in all likelihood. There's alcoholism. There's lots of other reasons, but those are two major reasons. So anyways, that was all to tell you that, oh yes, back to the rats. So okay, the rats are pulling on you can measure rat motivation by how hard they pull on the spring, let's say, and they're more motivated if they're running away and running towards, but let's go back to play. So you can take juvenile rats who haven't been able to play for a while, maybe they've been isolated, or maybe they just haven't been able to engage in physical activity, like many school children that you might be thinking about, neither allowed to play nor allowed to engage in physical activity, and there's a reason I'm telling you that. So anyways, you get one of these little rats and you can measure how hard he'll pull to go out and play, or how many buttons he'll push, you know. And that gives you an indication of his motivation. So anyways, you can see that a play-deprived juvenile rat will fight harder to play than a non-play-deprived juvenile rat. And so you can infer that the rat wants to go play. And, you know, you do that. You do the same measurement with everyone around you. If they want to do something, you're going to poke and prod at them to see what sort of things they're willing to overcome in order to go and do that. You'll object, even if you don't really object. It's like, it's a measurement device. And if they're willing to overcome a bunch of your objections, then you think, oh, well, maybe they really want to. And that's another thing to really know. If there's something you want, you need about 5 arguments about why you want it. Because the probability that the person who's opposing you will have 5 arguments about why you shouldn't have it is very low. They just won't have thought it through enough. So the other thing that happens in the future authoring exercise is that you're asked to articulate the reasons for all the goals that come out of your vision of the future. So you're asked, like, why would it be good for you? Why would it be good for your family? Why would it be good for broader society? And so that gives you 3 levels of argumentation right there. And if you have it articulated down into detail and it's related to other important goals, then you're a hell of a thing to argue with, because people just aren't that deep, by which I mean they just don't have that many levels of explanation or objection. And it's also really useful in relationship to your own mind, because if you want to do something that's difficult and that requires energy, a lot of different subsystems in your mind are going to throw up objections. It's like, well, maybe that isn't what you should be doing right now. Maybe you should be doing the dishes or vacuuming or watching TV or looking at YouTube. Or if you're really sneaky, when you're trying to do something hard, what your brain does is give you something else hard to do that's not quite as hard, so that you can feel justified in not doing the thing you're supposed to because you're doing something else useful. And if you give in to that temptation, which you often will, then it wins, and because it wins, it gets a little dopamine kick and it grows stronger. Anything you let win, the internal argument, grows. And anything you let be defeated shrinks, because it's punished. It doesn't get to have its way. So that's another thing really to remember. Don't practice what you do not want to become. And because they're neurological circuits. You build those things in there, man. They're not going anywhere. You can build another little machine to inhibit them. That's the best you can do. Once they're in there, you can't get them out. So, and then the ones you build to inhibit can be taken out by stress, and the old habits will come back up. So you got to be careful what you say and what you do, because you build yourself that way. So anyways, back to the rats. Okay, so the little rat gets to go out there and play. Now imagine one little rat is paired with another rat, but the other little rat is 10% bigger. 10% in juvenile rats is enough to attain permanent dominance. So the 10% bigger rat will win the first wrestling contest, okay? And so that's what happens. And then, so the little rat gets pinned, and maybe they play a bit, and then they're done with it, and so you separate them, then you let them play again. And the next time what happens is that the subordinate rat does the invitation to play. And that's like, you know, like a dog does when it wants to play. You can recognize that, kind of splays its feet apart, and it looks up and looks interested and sort of dances around. And you can do it with any kid that has a clue, you know, that hasn't been destroyed by adults. If your little 3-year-old kid or 4-year-olds are better for this, if you go like this, like, they know exactly what's going to happen. You know, they're ready to dart back and forth, and they'll usually smile. And kids love rough and tumble play, which is now basically illegal in all daycares. It seriously is. Kids need it so desperately because it teaches them the limits of their body and your body, and it teaches them what's painful and what isn't, and it teaches them the dance of play. And without that, they're just little disembodied blobs. Like, they have no finesse. That's what you're checking out when you dance with someone, you know. You're seeing if they have that fluency and facility for mutual reciprocal action embodied in them. And if they're kind of like this, you know, and just have no sense of rhythm and don't pay any attention to you and all of that, you have reason to question whether they actually inhabit their body and whether they can engage in a mutual interaction, a physical interaction that's going to be reciprocal and mutually satisfying. It's really important to check out. And a lot of that rough and tumble play, even interactions between a child and its mother. If you have a happy mother and a happy infant, and you videotape them and you speed up the videotape, you'll see that they're dancing. So one responds, then the other responds, then the other responds. It might just be with eye gaze and movement and all of that, but there's a dynamic interplay, which you don't see with depressed mothers and their infants. So, okay, so back to play. So the little rat who is the subordinate one, he has to do the invitation, and then the big rat can agree to play because he's in the dominant position. But if you pair them repeatedly, and this is really worth thinking about, because see, morality emerges out of repeated interactions. Because you might say, well, if you're only going to interact with someone once, you might as well just take advantage of them and run off. That's what a psychopath does, by the way. And there is room in the environmental niche for psychopaths, but they have to keep moving around, because otherwise people figure out who they are. So they just move around, and they can take advantage of one person, you know, maybe 5 times or 10 times or something, and then the reputation spreads and they got to get the hell out of there. So it's not a good long-term strategy, unless you can't think of a better one. So anyways, if you repeatedly pair these rats, unless the big rat lets the little rat win at least 30% of the time, the little rat will not ask the big rat to play. And it's a staggering discovery. It's a staggering discovery because you've got the emergence there of a implicit morality, essentially, that's even incarnated in rats, that emerges across multiple play sessions. It's like, yes, exactly. That's exactly what Piaget said about the emergence of morality. It's exactly the same idea at the rat level. So it's a massively, and the fact that there's a circuit, a separate neurophysiological circuit that's actually specialized for that sort of thing is also a big deal. Now, the other thing Panks have figured out is that if you deprive juvenile rats of the opportunity to engage in rough and tumble play, their prefrontal cortexes don't develop properly, and they become impulsive and restless, and then you can fix them with methylphenidate or Ritalin. And those are the drugs that are used to fix hyperactive kids, most of whom are male. And that's because, well, really, you're going to take your 6-year-old, your 5-year-old, you're going to put them in a desk, you're going to get them to sit there for 6 hours. That's your plan, right? That's a stupid plan. And they're denied the opportunity to engage in play. And that means that their ability to become social is being impaired. It may cause neurological impairment, that's what the rat evidence suggests. And then you suppress that with amphetamines, because amphetamines actually don't activate the play circuit. They activate a different circuit which will suppress the play circuit. So it's it's not very wise. And I'm not going to go off on that tangent because I could tell you why the school systems were set up that way, which I probably will at some point, because it's quite an interesting story in and of itself. And it's the reason all you guys are sitting in desks right now. Somebody laughingly referred to this once as grade 15, which I thought was pretty funny given the, well, look at the bloody place, you know. Oh, hideous. And, okay, so now, this is an interesting thing. So you got the emergence of morality in, say, chimps, you got the emergence of morality in wolves, you got the emergence of morality in rats, and the morality governs sequential interactions or group interactions. They have to repeat because, because it's an emergent property of social or repetitive interactions. That's why. You can't just localize it in one instance. It's repeated. And there's been computer simulations of this to help you figure out how you might attain victory across games, across time. Maybe you need a strategy. And there's a very simple strategy, which I believe is called modified tit for tat. So if you're nice to me, I'm nice back. And if you do something bad to me, I do something bad back. But imagine you run that out in sequences of behavior and see who does best with what strategy across time, or an alternative strategy. Here's the best strategy. I trust you. You trust me. We start interacting. You screw up, I whack you, and then I forgive you and we start again. That's modified tit for tat. And so, and there hasn't been it's a very simple algorithm. No one has come up with a better algorithm in computer game, in the computerized simulation of game space than that particular strategy. So it's like, trust, but don't be a pushover. If someone violates the rules, you got to nail them. But then you don't hold a grudge. You open the door to further interactions. So, pretty smart.